speech is titled, it's Electrifying. While at the branch of the Fort Worth Public Library, Chris found something that electrified him. No, he did not stick his fingers into the electrical outlet. Instead, he started reading a book by Kathleen Kroll about a famous individual and found an interesting story about electricity. Here he is to tell us this story. Please welcome distinguished Toastmaster Chris Nichols with the speech, It's Electrifying.
How many people in here know somebody that is afraid of lightning? Also know some little pets that can be afraid of lightning and thunder as well. Back in the mid-1700s, there were a lot of people afraid of lightning. It could strike someone dead in a moment. It could burn down a house. It could burn down an entire city. People could be very frightened by this. But there was one person that wasn't. He was fascinated with it. Benjamin Franklin. Back then, he had a theory. If you have a cloud, it probably has water vapor and an electrical charge. He had studied electricity for many years. He knew that an object that had an electrical charge could discharge it without touching another object. He knew it could pass from one object to another. He knew it could travel long distances. And in 1749, he had a theory. He thought, is electricity and lightning one and the same? He speculated that if a big cloud full of electrical charge passed over a tall object, like a huge tree or a large building, that it would discharge this electrical charge. And he speculated that it was electricity. He was one of the first people to conduct experiments to find out if lightning really was electricity. Now, he had some strikes against him. One, he was in political office. And the last thing that he wanted is someone going, look at old crazy Ben over there with his experiments. He had to be very careful. And he kept his experiments very private. Another strike, possibly a lightning strike. He wanted to learn if an electric charge could be captured by a metal rod. He created an experiment that involved a box, one that sentries on duty will often stand in. It's a box to protect you from the rain. It comes up, has a pitched roof, protects somebody from rain. And what he wanted to do is take a rod, shove it through the roof of that building, have to go up 20 feet. That rod would be insulated, and a lucky soul would stand in there with the rod on an insulated mat. Pity the soul for the person that had to do that. But if it's well insulated, he would live. And back in the 1700s, he knew. The issue, the strike against Ben Franklin was, in Philadelphia, there were no buildings large enough to place this up on top and have lightning strike it. Therefore, strike two. But he did not let this stop him. There was no strike three. He looked up one of his old childhood toys, the kite. He had a kite, some string, and a key. If people have heard this story before, there's some interesting facts concerning this. He did this in private. Like I said, he didn't want people to think that he was crazy. He stood in a barn on a stormy night with his son William, and they think this was around 1753. He had his kite, and the string was made of silk. Why does that matter? Because silk string, when wet, conducts electricity. When it's not wet, it doesn't. Therefore, that night, he stood in the barn, flew his kite. When the string grew wet, he held on to the dry side. He wrote about that night. He said, when the kite was in the air and lightning struck the kite, he could see the electrical fire go down the string and into the key. And he said, once it touched the key, it fired all around and didn't kill him or hurt him. With that experiment, he was able to determine that electricity and lightning were one and the same. But he didn't tell anybody about his experiment. But someone had heard about his experiment concerning the sentry box. King Louis XV, in May 1753, conducted the experiment concerning the sentry box. And he was able to prove what Benjamin Franklin said was correct. That rod did hold an electrical charge. Ben Franklin no longer had to conduct his kite experiment. His theory was proven. Now, what does he do with it? He probably went into his house and said, yes, I've been proven. But he had to find something to do with this. He was an inventor. He studied those metal rods and noticed that if they had a sharp point, they drew that electrical charge much easier. And he attached it to a house, and he ran a wire down the house to the ground, and was able to determine that when lightning struck that, the charge went down that wire and out of the ground and saved the house. Now, Ben could have made a lot of money off of this, but he didn't. He published his idea in his publication, the Almanac, and didn't patent it. He gave it for free. You don't hear about that much anymore. But even though he had this great experiment and came up with the lightning rod, there were still people that thought he was crazy. Back then, if lightning struck your house, it is thought God wanted that. And you are interfering with God when you do that. And back then, that's what they thought. But Ben knew better. The other thing, they would ring church bells to scare away the lightning. But what is a church bell made of? Metal. And oftentimes the lightning would strike the church bell and possibly kill the person ringing the bell. He had these things against him, but in the long term, he kept persistent and had these lightning rods installed on people's homes. He wrote down where these were installed. He kept track of them. They were installed all over the United States. And look today, they're still used, and they're saving people's lives and property. Thank you, Mr. Ben Franklin.